Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll give everyone another minute to come on to today's webinar about the Mass Fresh Grant. Great. All right. Looks like we have a pretty good attendee list of those we had RSVP'd. So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Abby Getman-Skillicorn. I work with Massachusetts Farm to School, and we're really delighted to have you join our webinar about the Massachusetts Fresh Grant. I'm joined today by my colleague Lisa Damon, who will be monitoring things and dropping useful links into the chat. And I am also joined by our colleague Maggie Nowak from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So for today, we'll do some very brief introductions. We'll go over a little bit about what Farm to School is, talk extensively about what the Mass Fresh Grant is, as far as generally what the grant can fund, and then who is eligible to apply for this grant. And Maggie will do a deep dive into the application review as far as what steps need to be taken in GEMS, the DESE system for grants management, and we will allow some time for questions and answers. This is a webinar today. We are recording. Please drop any questions that you have into the Q&A. And like I said, Lisa will be dropping different resource links into the chat. But again, I'm Abby. I'm on the Mass Farm to School team, and I will hand it over to Maggie to introduce herself.
Hey folks, I'm Maggie Nowak. I work for DESE's Office for Food and Nutrition. We have been very happy to be administering this grant now in its fourth grant cycle. There are a couple changes this year, but for the most part, this has been a really steady grant opportunity that's funded a lot of really diverse farm to school activities. So we're excited to review that with you and to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Wonderful. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, Mass Farm to School, we are a statewide organization that works to strengthen local farms and fisheries and promote healthy communities by increasing local food purchasing and education in schools. So thanks for joining our webinar. We have a variety of other ways that you can get involved with us, either through professional learning opportunities. I see a lot of familiar names that might have been at our statewide conference the other week. We provide networking opportunities. We do a lot of policy and advocacy work to support programs like the Mass Fresh Grant or local food incentive for child nutrition programs. And we offer other communications supports like our Harvest of the Month program for educators and child nutrition practitioners. So you'll hear when we are talking about the Mass Fresh Grant, there are elements of the three C's of Farm to School. So the classroom, cafeteria, and community. And when we see robust Farm to School programming happening, it's across these different sectors. No one Farm to School program looks the same, and different programs have different ways that they're bringing elements of farm to school education or eating to their students, be it in the classroom, in the cafeteria, or by engaging with the community, including through farm field trips or having community members, get involved with their school gardens and the like. So a little bit about this, and this is a model that we use that is from our sister organization up in Vermont called Shelburne Farms and Vermont Feed, and it's been a really successful model in helping programs strategize ways to carry forward farm to school across the different elements of educational communities. A little bit about the Mass Fresh Grant. So this is a statewide grant that is for K-12 schools and early education programs. It's administered by DESE's Office of Food and Nutrition Programs. And this upcoming fiscal year, for fiscal year 27, it's anticipated approximately $400,000 will be available, with awards of up to $40,000 per applicant. Important dates to note, the due date for the application is May 22nd. If you have any questions about the application or about eligibility, please get those over to DESE by May 8th. And by DESE, that's Maggie. And we'll drop her email into the chat, but it's also on the RFP on DESE's website. And the fiscal year 27 Mass Fresh Awards, they are, dependent upon state appropriation. We are actively Mass Farm to School is actively advocating to continue this really successful grant program. And just know that for this upcoming grant cycle, any grants would need to have all of their projects completed by June 30th of 2027. So Mass Fresh is really kind of a startup grant. It cannot be used to continue existing activities. Like it's not a continuity type of grant program. So as applicants, you should really demonstrate how your funds would be utilized to initiate or expand the farm to school activities in your learning environment. Eligible entities for this grant include programs that administer the National School Lunch Program or are licensed early education programs that offer the CACFP program, specifically for birth to age 5 years old. So after school programs that offer CACFP are not explicitly eligible unless you also are doing early education in your center, and this grant is really to focus on the youngest learners, if you will. So entities can include school districts, pre-K programs, the licensed early education centers, like Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA's, Head Start programs, etc., which you may see photos of in some of these slides from past grantees. Individual family and child care home providers are not eligible to apply at this time. We've had great success in seeing Mass Fresh applicants from really around the state and are really delighted to see that public investment get to every county in Massachusetts. And so if you're interested in reading more about previous Mass Fresh grantees and their work, you can check out Mass Farm to School's website. We have a list of all the descriptions of different grantee programs, including a report of past years on our website, which has just been dropped in as well. All right. And for this, I'm going to pass it over to Maggie to talk about the different grant tracks.
Thanks, Abby. So the Mass Fresh grant has this year 5 different grant categories, and applicants would be asked to choose one for which they would apply. Each category has the same application. It's really about what experience your institution has with farm to school or farm to ECE, and what the goals are that you have for this funding. So this grant funds farm to school initiatives that are with organizations that are new to farm to school, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. And same for schools. We fund schools that are new to farm to school with a new initiative. And then we also support programs who are expanding their farm to school initiatives. They've been doing work in this field for a long time, but they have a new program or staff person or objective that they're hoping to grant resources to. And then the last new grant category that we're introducing this year is called the Mass Fresh Core Planning Grant. So this grant is a strategic planning grant track, which is really for districts and early education programs that want to invest long-term in personnel that coordinate farm to school activities. So this would be the first year of planning for that for successful applicants that receive an award in this category. And there are some specific outcomes that you would need to accomplish if you applied to this grant track and completed 1 year of this grant funding. So we'll talk about that in a second. But really the goal of applying under this grant program is to work with DESE and Mass Farm to School to identify a long-term funding source for a staff person, or potentially for a staffing structure that includes stipends for teachers or school nutrition professionals that really integrate long-term farm to school programming into your school or your early education program. So any track that you might apply for can support staff salaries or can support stipends and personnel related funding components, but this grant track specifically, the planning grant, is for folks who want to think about doing this in a sustained way, really long term. So we'll continue to chat about what that looks like, but that is a new addition. And again, all of the actual application questions are the same no matter what track you apply for. And the funding category, I'm sorry, the funding amount that you have access to is also still the same. So a minimum of 3,000 and a maximum of 40,000. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, applicants who are applying under this category of new, this this phrasing, this use of the word new, it can be a little confusing, but it refers to the applicant, not the project itself. So when we say new to farm to school for that grant category, it's about whether your institution has been engaged in none or just one of the farm to school 3Cs that Abby mentioned earlier in this webinar. If you've only been engaged in one piece of that puzzle, so to speak, if you've only been doing classroom education, or maybe your cafeteria gets local apples every fall, but that's really the only thing that you're doing related to farm to school, we would categorize you as new to farm to school programming. Similarly, if you have had robust farm to school programming at your institution, but it has not been operational for the last at least 3 years, then you can also qualify as a new applicant. This categorization is at the applicant's discretion to determine. So it is up to you to have an understanding of your institution's engagement with farm to school and to choose that category that's most appropriate for you. Next slide. Great. And as I mentioned, this new grant track, I mentioned a number of these components a little bit earlier, but it's really designated to support personnel capacity building for long-term farm to school programming. And that funding, and to do that, there's a number of different models that you might be pursuing. And there are a couple listed here of what that funding might look like. But it's of note that successful execution and completion of this grant track will allow the grantee potential access to additional years of funding. And that may be from state, federal, or private foundation funding in the future. So it does open up continued doors for further investment. And we'll talk a little bit about what needs to be completed by an applicant in that category. I'm sorry, for an awardee in that category to open up continued years of funding support. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, Abby. I'm going to just make one more note about the new track. So this is a grant track that is open to folks new to farm to school, expanding in farm to school, and it is open to both schools and early education programs. So we understand that folks are thinking about farm to school projects in different ways. You might be quote unquote new to farm to school, but maybe you're new because you've been dormant for many years. And really that investment you need to make is in strategic planning or in a staff person. So this might be the right grant track for you. And it does not depend on whether your institution is a K through 12 district or an early education program or network. All of those entities are able to apply under that grant track if you are interested. All right.
Thanks, Maggie. So, as you know, Maggie talked a little bit about the new grant track. In especially the traditional four tracks of new or expanding Mass Fresh farm to school programs. These are really designed again to fund startup or expansion of farm to school activities, but they can fund building a new school garden or an indoor growing operation. Like we've seen a lot of hydroponic systems do really well with this grant, developing classroom curriculum or lesson plans, uh, expanding in school or childcare programming that might include gardening, cooking, or taste tests. Field trips have been funded using this funding, as you saw in the last slide. Students from Prospect Hill Charter School at the farm school, and et cetera, et cetera. what we also find really compelling about this grant is it can also assist in funding professional development and learning, both for educators and for nutrition professionals. So, in the event that you really want to leverage more seasonal foods that are available to you, but maybe your kitchen staff don't have the necessary equipment or the necessary skills to really make those foods translate into menu items. Those are other investments that you can make. Or maybe you have an outdoor space for a school garden, but maybe not all of your educators are feeling as capable of getting their students out to the garden. There are opportunities to fund professional development to familiarize your educators with those opportunities as well. And now I'll hand it back to Maggie to talk about the GEMS application.
Thanks, Abby. So, put on your seatbelt. We are going to go through GEMS, which is definitely for some, it may be a completely new system, especially for my early education applicants. So, school districts that are on the call, bear with me because I am going to go into a little bit of detail. And most school districts are fairly familiar with this platform at this point. So there might be some repetition of what you already know. But GEMS is basically a online platform. It is the primary, and I think at this point, exclusive way that DESE manages grant programs. And it creates application processes, review, and the administering of grant funding. And GEMS is functions based on a personal login structure. So, though your district or your early education program will have a profile in GEMS, each individual user is going to have their own login. And it's very important that you, as an individual user, gain your own login access. So, a sign in email and password. You also will need to be assigned a role as a user in the GEM system. So as I said, most school districts already have them are already set up in the system. If you are part of your school district's school nutrition program, you may not have ever touched this system. And if that is the case, I would suggest that you start by going to your central administration and seeing if you have a grant manager or someone in your office who has basically an administrative role in GEMS. It's called a user access administrator. They can provide you, they will basically grant you a personal login to the system. So to repeat, DESE does not grant the personal login access to GEMS for entities that already are profiles within GEMS. If you're an early education program, or potentially a very small charter school, etc., that's never worked in the GEMS grant system before, you will need to basically complete a registration process to temporarily access that platform so you can apply. It's fairly streamlined. It's a couple of pages of general information that we collect, and it takes us up to 5 days to process that access. But then your institution will have that same access to apply for this grant, but also any other grants you might be eligible for within DESE. Last but not least, to work on this grant application, you're going to want to ensure that your grant role is the LEA grant writer role. So that phrasing is very important if you're working with your administrator who has GEMS access and you are trying to set yourself up to apply for the application. You're going to want to ensure that they assign you that title, that status. All right, next slide. So to repeat, as I mentioned, for folks that are new to GEMS, you do not have any association with the system and your entire institution does not. You're going to complete this GEMS temporary organization access request form. I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat momentarily. And you're going to email the completed form to me. And it will be processed by DESE between 5 and 7 business days. If your institution, your school already has GEMS access, but you do not see the application in your queue when you go to search, then go ahead and email me. It may just be that it may be an administrative error that you weren't added to the grant, or there might be some other eligibility question that we need to figure out to ensure that your institution is eligible. And as Abby mentioned at the top, you do have to be a program that offers a child nutrition program, either school breakfast, school lunch, or the CACFP program for early education programs, to be able to apply for this grant. So that designation has been made in GEMS, and those are the institutions that have access to the application. But if you think that you should be eligible and you don't see the application available to you when you search for it, please do send me an email. All right. So again, if you are new to GEMS, it's really important that you start this process of accessing the platform early. If you are doing this at the last minute, it may be that you don't even get access to GEMS in time to apply. As that May 22nd deadline is a firm deadline, we cannot make any exceptions. The platform itself shuts off the ability to apply after 5 p.m. So again, I will throw, if it hasn't been thrown into the chat, thank you, Lisa, I think it has, the temporary access request form that you'll want to fill out. And these should not be submitted past May 15th because they will not be processed in time to apply. So apply early. You don't need to apply often, but apply early for that access to GEMS. All right, next slide. Great. And so when you're going into GEMS for any user, whether you're new and you just get granted temporary access or you are very familiar with the platform, you're going to sign in, as you see at the top left. Then you're going to go to search for the funding application by going to search and then the funding application. Thank you, Abby. You're going to need to make sure in the step 3 in that search function that you are in fiscal year 2027. It's going by quick, but that's already the fiscal year we're looking at. And you're looking for the fund code 0710. And you'll see the name of a grant, the Mass Farming Reinforces Education and Student Health listed. And you should be able to press search and you should then see your institution's application available to you when you press the search function. Next slide. One of the biggest hangups that we see when folks are trying to apply and start their application is that they haven't changed the status of their grant. So you might be able to search your grant, find it, look at all the questions. But when you go to fill it out, the questions are grayed out. You are not able to use drop downs or press buttons or toggle between different questions. Almost the 95% of the reason that this happens for most eligible applicants is because you need to take the step of changing the status of your application. So you'll see at the very bottom what that landing page for the grant looks like. It'll say at the very top of the page your application status. When you first open this application, it'll say not started. To be able to start filling in answers to questions, you have to change the status of your grant to application started, which is highlighted on the left of the slide in green. That's what it will look like as your status. When you hover over that hyperlink to make that change, it will list all the individuals who are able to make that change. And as I mentioned a couple slides earlier, you will need the role of grant writer to be able to write the grant and to change the status of your application. So, all right, next slide. So there are a number of components of this grant. We're not going to go over all of them today. They should be fairly self-explanatory in the GEMS system. We also are able to provide and is available to you on GEMS outside of the login on the main page of GEMS, a PDF, actually I think it's a Word document of all the application questions. So you can review them before you are going into the system to complete them. We are going to go over at length the application components that are highlighted here. And you will also see listed on this slide that each category of questions has an associated point value. So applications are reviewed and scored out of 100 points, and different parts of the application are weighed differently. So when you're thinking really about where you should really be focusing your most effort and attention to detail, really look at what different categories are weighed in terms of scoring when you are doing that completion of your application. So next slide. This is an example, just generally, of how you're going to navigate and what the system looks like. So it's very boxy, and you'll see a number of different types of ways that you'll answer questions. Some are fill in the blank, some are yes or no button questions, and some are going to be general, long answer blocks where you can type in text. Many of those blocks do have word limits. For the most part, that's noted for the question. But if you find that you can't type any more, that's because you've hit the word limit in that open-ended question. Next slide, please. The first primary component we're going to just overview is the child nutrition program questions, which are scored at 16 points. This grant is funded at the Department of Education, but in the Office for Food and Nutrition. With that in mind, applicants do not need to be school nutrition directors or members of that, department or group in your organization or in your school, but you do need to partner with them to get some more information about your program. And I'll also just add here that strong applications that are usually funded do have some connection to the service of meals, whether that's school meals or early education meals. Usually, the application has integrated that component into your proposal. A couple of pieces of information that are listed here that you will need to get from your nutrition program director or operator include your agreement number with DESE for operating this program, the types of meals that you serve through school breakfast, school lunch, or the child and adult feeding program, as well as information about those sites that might be in centers that have multiple locations or in districts with multiple locations. And then a few other questions we have about the farm to school activities that you might already be doing. Next slide. And then as we get out of general information into the application itself, we will ask you for a project description, which is fairly standard. So this is really you giving us a snapshot of your vision of your project proposal. For folks who this is their first foray into farm to school, you're just going to be describing your project. But for folks who are expanding current activities, it's really important that you make clear to the reviewers how this proposal is new and how it's novel and adding something different to the work that you already do. Because as Abby said, we can't provide sustained level funding to something that's already been happening for many years or semesters. And again, strong applications are going to have a connection to your child nutrition meal program, and really think about how local foods from farms around Massachusetts, or some other component of the school meal program or child and adult care feeding program is integrated into your farm to school work. Next slide. The biggest component of your application is a work plan. The work plan is set up as a table. It will ask you to do basically two things. You're first going to set 3 goals that you have for this grant program, basically for the funding that you receive up to $40,000. What are your 3 goals to accomplish with that funding? We're going to ask you for those 3 goals. And under each goal, we're going to ask you to include the activities or the things that you're going to do to reach that goal. We'll provide an example in a moment, but basically strong applications are at least going to include 2 activities under each goal. And so you can really think about that goal as like the aspirational change that you want to see in your institution around farm to school. And the activities are your actual action steps or programming that this funding is going to invest in to make those goals into a reality. What's important to note, as I mentioned earlier, is that for the Mass Fresh Core Planning Grant, there are 4 activities. So those are the things underneath your goals that we do require applicants to put into their work plan and figure out how they would integrate into their grant application. So if you are awarded a funding within that track, that planning grant track, you will need to complete the following activities to basically have successfully completed that year of your grant and have access to potentially future funding. So that includes a job description or consultant scope of work. So a job description of a potential position you might want to hire that is coordinating farm to school activity, or an outside contractor you might want to work with. It's developing a future funding proposal, so not for this year, but for a future year, for basically year two of investment in personnel regarding farm to school. You're going to complete a farm to school 1 year action plan, which is a template that we will provide you to complete that basically tells us more about how you'll be expanding and strategically developing your programming in farm to school. And then we're going to ask for basically attestations that you have worked with your HR department or individual and your business official at your organization or district to talk about what future funding looks like for this kind of investment. Abby and I know firsthand from doing this programming for a long time that we have such champions in farm to school in all areas of a district or an institution. But if you don't have your business manager or your CEO or your hiring folks, your HR department involved in those conversations, sometimes funding stalls or programming doesn't go anywhere. And so we really want that to be part of this planning process for the year of your grant in school year 26-27 that you're having these conversations. All right, next slide. So this is an example of the table with a anecdote provided in red. So you'll see in this work plan that their goal, overarching goal of this applicant is to increase student exposure and acceptance of local fruits and vegetables by 50%. So they even give like a marker of measuring change. And one of the activities that they're going to accomplish or I'm sorry, execute is to host a Harvest of the Month taste test at their elementary schools. What this table shows is the 7 different basically components of the table that you'll need to complete. So you'll have to select a target audience from a drop down, an indicator, so basically how you're going to measure change, and that you also select from a drawdown. You're going to measure, basically give a prediction of your impact. That's a fill in the blank. And then you'll give us your timeline as well as the responsible individual who will be overseeing that activity. So that is what we will ask for each goal, and 3 goals are required when submitting your grant in the work plan. Right. Next is a letter of support. So we require at least 1 letter of support from applicants. A letter of support should address how basically the person writing that letter of support should attest to the applicant's ability to successfully complete the proposal that you're submitting to us. And it should also, speak to the benefits that this proposal is going to bring to your institution and why it is going to be so impactful. Lastly, this is not required, but if the person writing the letter of support is going to play an active role in the work plan, they need to state that and state how they are equipped to be able to support. You are able to submit up to 2 letters of support, but no more than 2 will be scored. Additionally, we do ask that if you're going to fund contracted community partners or partners with your grant funds, that all of those entities have provided a letter of support. It basically tells DESE and tells the review team that you have made a plan with that community partner or that contractor. They're aware, they have the tools and capacity to support you, and they're putting that in writing in a letter of support. If you plan to work with more than 2 community partners, so 3 or more, you will be asked to provide all of those letters of support, but only 2 will be scored as part of that review. So if you want to go to the next slide, I think it says very much similarly that information. The platform GEMS will only allow you to upload 2 letters of support. So if you need to provide additional letters because you have more contracted partners, you will just go ahead and email those to me and I will manually add them to your application. And for folks who might not be leveraging additional partners outside of your institution to accomplish your proposal, that's absolutely fine. You might have all the expertise you need in your school or in your early education program. In that case, you might think about leveraging a letter of support from a parent volunteer, from a legislator, maybe from a community partner who knows your institution well and can speak to your success at executing these kinds of projects. So we give a couple of examples here of who you might ask for a letter of support from. It is important that the main applicant who is submitting the application should not also be the one writing a letter of support. For example, if you are a teacher or you're part of your school district's science department, we would not want to see that the science department is writing a letter of support in addition to being the lead of applying for this grant. But if you were per se going to partner with your PE department to do some kind of physical activity related to farming and gardening, it would be acceptable for your, physical education, director or coach to submit a letter of support to kind of speak to that cross collaboration. So if you have questions about, who's an appropriate sender of a letter of support, please let us know. Great. And then last but not least is the budget. So you telling us what funding you need and how you are going to spend it. So we request information about your budget in two ways, and both are required. The first is through through the GEMS platform. There is a formal way that you would fill out your budget. It's through the screenshots you see here, where you basically are going to choose a category where you are requesting funds. You are going to, then you see an arrow to this add budget detail. You're going to modify that section and add a budget detail and basically provide a little bit more information and the total amount of funding that you're requesting in that category. We'll see that in 1 second. But the one thing I also want to note about when you fill out your budget in GEMS is when you go to your main page, you're going to see a calculator at the very top of GEMS in the budget details page that's talking about indirect costs. Indirect costs are usually the costs that some institutions or schools might charge that basically are the background costs that make it possible to administer a grant, to do all the administrative functions of requesting funds, etc. Many schools, many applicants are not interested in submitting or requesting reimbursement for indirect costs, and they're not required. But DESE does put a limit to the amount of funding that can go toward indirect costs. And so a calculator is provided to you at the top of your budget page. You do not need to integrate it into your budget. You can ignore it if it does not serve you. But if you do decide to request reimbursement for indirect costs in your budget, you do need to, reference that calculator to make sure that you're not going over the maximum allowed limit. Next slide, Abby. So when you press into add a budget detail, you're going to see this screen and it will ask you for a couple of things. It'll ask you for a function code. So the object code is kind of that big general category of how you're spending funds, whether it's supplies, materials, people, contractors. The function code is a little bit more in detail. And it can really range from talking about the department for which those funds are being requested, or more specifically about how they're going to be used, like for professional development. You'll see a note on this slide that DESE does provide a list of options for you to basically figure out what the best function code is going to be for what you're requesting. That resource is available under DESE resources on the GEMS homepage, and it's basically called a charts of accounts, guidance and crosswalk. So it is at the discretion of your institution to determine the object code and function code. It's not something that DESE is policing or, going to is going to make you ineligible to apply for the grant. But it is important that when you make this distinction, if you are funded, that is going to be the way that you also draw down funds is by specifying these codes. So you'll want to work with your business manager to make sure that you are putting in the right information when you are completing your budget. So in addition, it will ask for the cost of this item. If it's a supply, there might be a quantity, if you're buying shovels, for instance. And then just very briefly, it is required that you enter in your narrative description what this service is or how you calculated this cost. So that in a nutshell is completing the GEMS budget. You want to go to the next slide. In addition to that, within the narrative questions of the grant, we're going to ask you to complete a budget narrative. The difference between that and the GEMS budget is the budget narrative tells us how the money you're asking for relates to your work plan. It basically helps us understand, okay, this $5,000 is being invested in these activities to meet this goal. It really puts together all of the pieces to make sure that, the proposal you have in place and the work plan you've set out, that's what the money is actually going towards. So if you're doing a project on all about taste tests and you have goals around, increasing students' interest and desire to eat, local grain or local seafood, but then your budget is for a greenhouse, we're going to be a little confused. So we really ask for folks to tie all that information together in their budget narrative to help us see how everything relates. Completing both of those components is required in submitting your grant. All right, next slide. So very quickly, unallowable costs. So the purchase of food is not allowable if it is going to be integrated into your meal program. You might be requesting food for other programming. Maybe it's a classroom cooking activity or an after-school program. That is allowable and appropriate. But if that food is, you wanting to source local, beef that would then go on the lunch menu every Tuesday, that is not going to be allowable cost. That needs to come from your school nutrition budget or your CACFP budget. In addition, the funding can't be used to then go into an item that would be basically part of a fundraiser or be part of a sale for your school. So we do get this question sometimes, but sometimes folks are, doing a farm, trying to create a farm share out of the food that they grow, that they would then sell those shares back to their school district. DESE, it would not be an allowable cost for DESE to invest in the costs associated with, your students creating a farm share where you would also charge funding for that program. But if you're donating those produce items to the local food pantry, for instance, that would be an appropriate investment and would be allowable under the grant. In addition, as I mentioned, and I will pull this in a second, though maybe, yes, I will pull this in a second. I don't think it's been put in the chat yet. The RFP is available. I'm sorry, the grant application is available as a Word document on the GEMS homepage, so you don't need to have a login to see the questions. And then if you are not a school, but you are interested in your budget, including indirect costs, there is an indirect cost application that you will need to submit to DESE to basically set your maximum limit of indirect costs. And that has to be completed annually. So thank you, Lisa. If you have more information, if you need more information on that, I will just, I'm happy to answer questions on that. Great. I think that is everything for that slide. Feel free to go to the next one. Awesome. Okay, great. So when you're finished with your application, you've completed all those components. The application submission is a three-step process. So you should be the grant writer in your program. You've filled out all the questions. You are going to go ahead and change the status of the grant the same way you changed the status to apply for the grant. When you do that, it is going to kick your grant to another layer of approvals within the platform to your fiscal representative. Your fiscal representative has to approve that this is all looking appropriate, that your budget is appropriate based on your institution's policies and protocols. They need to approve the grant. And then lastly, the superintendent or the chief executive of your organization has to provide approval. All three of those approval steps have to be completed before 5 p.m. on May 22nd. That is all part of the process of submission. So if you have completed actually all of the application questions, but you haven't had those three levels of submission of your grant, your application would still not be considered. So it's really important that you are starting your application sooner rather than later. So you have time for all of these approval processes. These are all done digitally. Previously, DESE managed, kind of a old school form that you would have everyone physically sign. We're hoping that, this digital process is a little bit more accessible for folks, but it does have to be completed all the steps before the deadline for your application to be considered. All right, next slide. Final note. So again, a reminder, if you are working with contracted partners and you have more than two, you're going to need to email me those additional letters of supports from your contractors. If you have questions about the grant, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A today and we will answer them live. But we also will be collecting questions via email, which you can email me, and we will be posting the answers on the question and answer page of the RFP. So I believe that is in the chat, and I will also share it again. But it is basically a running list of questions and answers for this particular grant that folks have asked. And we do need to make those publicly available so that everyone has that same information consistently. So you might give me a call or shoot me an email with an application question, and you may get a response from me that just says, I will answer it through the Q&A. Know that you followed the right process, and I apologize in advance that I can't be more direct, but this is part of making sure that this application is fair and equitable for everyone and that everyone has the same information. So submit those questions to me directly, but know that your answer won't come via an email back from me directly. It will be answered through the Q&A, and I will let you know when that answer is posted. All right. I think that might be it for me. Yes, passing it to Abby for a little break there.
Great. So, as Maggie's been mentioning, while the RFP is live and is on the DESE website, which you can see a screenshot of here, and there's a link in the chat, you would be applying through the GEMS platform. If you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. I see a couple that we'll get to momentarily. We do have quick resource links that you can, this slide deck will be available for you to reference on the Mass Farm to School website after today's call. So you can find more about the Mass Fresh grant application, different resources, which include contractors you might be interested in working with. There's the GEMS walkthrough that Maggie mentioned earlier. We also have information about our Harvest of the Month program and our professional development calendar that are all linked in this slide. And in the event that you have an idea, you have a concept, and you want to talk through your potential Mass Fresh grant application with someone, you can sign up for a mini grant coaching session with Mass Farm to School. So if you use the QR code on the screen, you can sign up for a calendar slot. In the event that you need evening hours, please email me directly, abby@massfarmtoschool.org. I'll put that in the chat, and we can schedule those on an as needed basis. Just know that Mass Farm to School, we're involved in supporting applicants and really promoting this grant and advocating for the funding to secure it. We are not involved at all in the evaluation and grading process, but once applicants are awarded through DESE's evaluation process, we then work with awarded programs to execute your grant on an as needed basis over the course of the grant term. So let's hop over to questions and answers. Both Maggie and my email are up on the screen. Maggie, we have a question about picnic tables to create an outdoor classroom in their garden space, or would those be an allowable cost?
Yeah, great question. Yes, that would be an allowable cost. I would definitely, again, think about how your application is integrating all of the three C's when you think about those picnic tables, how it's connecting to the classroom, the community, and to the cafeteria. But picnic benches themselves are an allowable cost and could be part of your budget.
Great. And we have someone who's asking to clarify the indirect cost section. So do you want me to go
Sure.
back to one of the
Yeah,
slides?
you don't have to. I think there wasn't too much provided, but basically, indirect costs are those, overall business cost of operating, a school or a center. And for some institutions, when they submit a grant, they include indirect costs in their application. DESE does fiscally have the ability to basically limit and set a bar of how much they are funding within a grant opportunity for indirect costs. For districts, that is consistent, and I'm not going to rattle off the percentage because I won't know it off the top of my head, but I believe all school districts have a consistent rate or it's, a published rate that's dependent upon your school size. And so if you're a school or district, you should easily be able to access that number. And it's going to be provided to you in GEMS in that indirect cost calculator. If you are a nonprofit organization that is an early education program that is operating a meal program with the Office for Food and Nutrition, your organization might already have an indirect cost rate that was approved by DESE. And if so, that is the rate that you can apply towards. If you're a new applicant and you haven't gone through that process, you will need to submit an indirect cost application to DESE if you want to include indirect costs in your budget. That process happens on a yearly basis where DESE approves indirect cost rates for entities that are not schools. And so if you are interested in going through that process, I believe that has been put into the chat. I will put it in again, how to submit that application. Um, you may denote indirect costs in your budget as a placeholder when you're submitting your grant. And as you await the processing of the DESE application process for indirect costs, then your budget could be updated to include them if you're awarded after the submission process. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarity around indirect costs. Feel free to reach out if you have further questions. And Abby, I don't think I verbally mentioned it, so I will say that if you need if you're new to GEM specifically, Abby just put in the chat a YouTube walkthrough recording that we produced of basically how to function. We won't do a live demo today just because you have access to that video at your leisure to watch. But it does walk you through physically how to navigate the GEM site, get to the application, and fill in your application.
Thanks, Maggie. We have a couple more minutes, so in the event that folks do have additional questions, please pop them into the Q&A. We're happy to answer them while you're on the call. And as mentioned, this is being recorded, so we will be posting both the webinar and the slides on the Mass Farm to School website, and then questions and answers that come in to DESE related to this grant will be posted on the questions and answer page through the RFP. But thank you all for joining today. Really appreciate robust attendance and interest in the Mass Fresh grant. We'll hang on for another minute. If folks do not have questions that they want to pop into the Q&A, we will take it as a sign that you might be having this webinar on in the background as you're doing some other work and might not have closed out of the tab today. But thank you again.
We hope to see your application.
All right, it looks like we have another question. Would food purchases for student parent cooking demonstrations be eligible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as long as that programming is taking place outside of a school or early education program, mealtime and meal program, they are allowable costs. That food for that programming that is maybe after school or in the evening, would be allowable.
Great. Thank you, folks. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Take good care.